This is All India Radio. In the program Spotlight, now we bring you a discussion on India prepares to assume G-20 Presidency. The participants are Ashok Sajjanhar, former diplomat, and Nilova Roy Chaudhary, journalist.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi on Tuesday unveiled India's logo, theme and website for its presidency of the G20, a grouping of the world's largest economies, which India is set to assume on December 1st. Speaking as he unveiled the logo, Prime Minister Modi said, India's G20 presidency is coming at a time of crisis and chaos in the world. The world is going through the after effects of a disruptive, once-in-a-century pandemic, conflicts, and a lot of economic uncertainty, he said. India will assume the presidency of the G20 for 1 year from December the 1st, 2022 to 30th November 2023. Under its presidency, India is expected to host over 200 G20 meetings across the country beginning next month. It will be taking over from Indonesia, which is hosting the G20 Leaders Summit, which the Indian Prime Minister is scheduled to attend on November 15th and 16th in Bali. Ambassador Ashok Sajjanhar joins us this evening to walk us through what the significance is of India assuming the chair of the G20, the group of which was begun to counter the global economic crisis of 2008. Good evening, Ambassador Sajjanhar.
Good evening, Nilova.
Unveiling the logo earlier this evening, the Prime Minister said the symbol of the lotus in the G20 logo is a representation of hope in these times. Why is it especially significant for India to be assuming the presidency of the G20 at this point of time? And what message will India give to the world's most advanced economy?
I think the significance of India assuming the presidency of G20 at this juncture is that the whole world is going through very cataclysmic times. I think since the time that the G20 came into existence, first at the level of the finance ministers and the governors of central banks, that was in 1998, and then after that, in the wake of the 2007-2008 international economic crisis, when the level was raised to summit to the heads of state and heads of government, I don't think that the world has seen such turbulence, such turmoil, such uncertainty as it sees today. Because in 2007, there was only an international economic crisis which the world had to deal with. And you would recall that the first meeting was held in Washington, D.C. Then in 2009, we had two meetings, one in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and the second in London. And 2010, again, we had two meetings, one in Toronto and the other in Seoul in South Korea. After that, we've been having meetings annually. But the challenges that the world has confronted over all this period, these challenges have basically been financial in nature as to how to deal with this. But today, the sort of situation as it exists is not only financial, not only economic, but also hugely political. First, we had the pandemic in 2020, and the economies of all the 200 countries in the world, they were severely adversely impacted. In addition to that, the health situation, even in developed countries, whether it is the United States or it is European countries or Japan, none of them was spared. All of them were affected. And scarcely the world trying to get out of the impact of the COVID-19 that we have the Russia-Ukraine conflict. And that has now been going on for more than 8 months. Now, it might be a localized conflict in terms of its geographical coverage, Nilova. That's only in Europe, in Russia and Ukraine. But its implications have been truly global. We have seen in terms of the shortages of food, in terms of shortages of fertilizer, in terms of shortages of fuel, the energy shortages. And of course, in addition, we've had these huge supply chain disruptions. And the countries which are getting majorly affected by it are not so much the developed countries, although they are witnessing inflation which is the highest in 40 years in the US and in the United Kingdom. But it is the developing countries of Asia, of Africa and South America which are being forced to bear the brunt of this conflict, while they are in no way responsible for this. So I think the situation at which India assumes the presidency is very significant. And what you mentioned just now, Prime Minister said that irrespective of the circumstances and the surroundings around it, the lotus always continues to bloom. And so our logo, which has the lotus and which encapsulates the customs and traditions and civilizational ethos of India. So we will be able to make this contribution to the world in these times of difficulty.
Ashok, this is going to be the largest, the G20 summit when we hold it next year in September, I believe, is going to be the largest ever such conclave India has ever hosted. Now, besides all of the various meetings across the country that are going to be held in the run-up to that summit, what do you think are the particular areas that India would be specially interested in highlighting and trying to give the message go forward?
A couple of points here, Nilova. You are very right that it will be the highest ever gathering of world leaders in India when the summit takes place in India in September of next year. But I think in addition to the numbers, we also need to be mindful that all the G7 members are going to be in India. All the P5 members are going to be in India. All the BRICS members, there is an overlap between all of these. The point I'm making is that these are going to be very significant players in the international, on the global scene, whether it is in the area of economy or it is in the area of politics for that matter. G20 represents about 80% of the global GDP. It represents 75% of international trade, about 2/3 of the world population, and about 60% of the world's area. So, it's a very significant body in that sense. Now, in terms of the message that India would seek to give, I think what we really need to also keep in mind is two things. Number one, that this is a platform. This is a global forum for discussing and taking decisions on economic cooperation, global financial architecture, etc. It doesn't really deal with the political issues. But because of the situation that prevails in the world today, I think both the summit in Bali next week and also the Indian presidency will have willy-nilly to deal with the political issues that are confronting the world today. The Russia-Ukraine conflict, the contestation between the United States and China-Taiwan stress and tension, activities of the North Korean regime. So I think politics will also enter this arena, although G20 is not supposed to be dealing with this.
I was sort of more looking to try and ask you what the focus areas of India will be in this particular platform or forum. Russia is a member of the G20, as is China, and you raised all of these very pertinent political issues. But more than that, even economically, I mean, the entire oil crisis that the world is going through, the enormously high prices, lots and lots of things. External Affairs Minister is in Russia today. So do you think that Prime Minister will be able to impress upon President Putin, for example, that the war should come to a close now?
I think that will happen in parallel on the side of the G20. I think what the Prime Minister mentioned himself today, and I think this is the theme of G20, and I was coming to that the G20 really has to deal with economic issues and financial matters. And so it will be for the benefit of the world and for everyone if we don't drag these extraneous political issues when we are having these G20 meetings. Because of paucity of time, I'll not go into it, but some way or the other, these issues have been dragged onto the agenda of the Bali meeting. But I'm hopeful that whatever might be the final declaration emanating out of Bali, and that will serve as the platform as to how we take forward our presidency, that we'll be able to focus on the economics. Now, as far as economics and finance is concerned, exactly the issues that we discussed, whether the energy security is concerned, food security, supply chains, sustainable development, climate change, I think these are all issues that the Prime Minister mentioned. He also mentioned that next year the world celebrates the year of the millets. And in India, we have been using these coarse grains throughout for hundreds of years. So this is something, and yoga and Ayurveda are traditional knowledge, how we can share that with the world. And I think in terms of the objectives, what he said, let us not try to view the world as the first world or the third world. Let us try to view the world as one world. And this is the message I think India has been giving consistently over the last so many years now. And even our theme, which emanates from both philosophy and policy, that is Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam, we look upon the whole world as a family. So the theme that we have identified, one earth, one family, one future, it's very evocative, and it would seek to bring the whole world on one platform, so that through diplomacy, through dialogue, we can take care of our differences and then work together for common peace, security and prosperity. That would be the hope and also the idea with which India will take forward its presidency.
That's quite interesting, given the fact that most of the member countries which will be attending all of the G20 meetings, most of them are sort of ranged against Russia in this particular conflict that it initiated against the Ukraine. Now, so India's diplomatic skills will also be enormously tested by this entire effort, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely, I fully agree with you. India will have to be nimble-footed and will have to be dexterous in its pursuit of the diplomacy, what it follows. But I think if you look at India at the moment, I would suggest for your consideration and the consideration of the listeners, is that India finds itself in a sweet spot, because India has the support of a large segment of the international community. In terms of its economy, it has just become the fifth largest economy in the world. And many international financial agencies like Morgan Stanley and the others are suggesting that over the next 5 years, India will be the fourth largest economy, and by the beginning of the 2030s, India will be the third largest economy. It is, in any case, the fastest growing major economy in the world. I think the manner in which India has dealt with the COVID-19 pandemic, whether it is in terms of the health impact or the economic impact, and the manner in which it has been able to create and manufacture these vaccines, and while using it for itself, it has also been able to share this with more than 200 million doses with about 100 countries. It has resulted in the image of India and the profile of India and the respect that it has earned in the world. I think that has gone up. So that gives it much greater leverage in terms of providing a leadership to the world when it takes over as the presidency of the G20 from 1st of December.
So what you are suggesting is that India probably at this point of time is best placed to try, first of all, to maybe tell Russia that diplomacy needs to be now given a chance and there should be a cessation of hostilities, while also telling all of the other countries to not pressurize Russia too much. India is diplomatically also likely to be in a sweet spot this particular G20.
I would think so, because you would have seen that the message that was given by Prime Minister Modi to President Putin in Samarkand was that this is not an era of war, this is not the time for war. And rather than taking affront or being offended by this, President Putin has continued to shower praise on India, on the manner in which India is conducting its foreign policy, and personally singling out also Prime Minister Modi. So there is a space that exists between the two countries and between the two leaders. And let us see what happens once we get the details of the discussions between External Affairs Minister Dr. Jaishankar during his visit to Moscow. There are these possibilities, but much will depend also on what happens between now and next week when the Bali summit takes place, whether Mr. Putin decides to attend that or he stays away from that. There are still a number of imponderables in the air, and the next few days and weeks will give us some more clarity on the basis of which India can take forward its presidency.
So indeed, I mean, they're very interesting times, and there's a lot of expectation going ahead as India is set to assume as presidency of the G20. Thank you so very much, Ambassador Sachinhar.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure being with you. Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion on India prepares to assume G20 presidency. The participants were Ashok Sajjanhar, former diplomat, and Nilova Roy Chaudhary, journalist. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. You can listen to it on our mobile app, News on AIR. This program is also available on our YouTube channel, News on AIR Official. You may email your opinion about this program at airnsttalks@gmail.com.